Some stories are better heard with someone else. But you're here alone. Welcome to Don't Listen Alone. This is 100% ad-free, just you and whatever comes next. Drop your location and the time before we begin. Now, listen carefully. Not everything you hear is part of the story. This happened about 20 years ago, and even now, I do not talk about it casually. For a long time, I barely spoke about it at all. In fact, it took me 10 years before I finally told anyone what happened. Even now, I am still careful about who I share it with, because I know how strange it sounds. I also know how quickly people can dismiss something they have never experienced themselves. But I know what happened to me, and I know I was not dreaming. That is the first thing I always want to make clear, because when people hear a story like this, that is usually the first explanation they reach for. They assume it was a dream, sleep paralysis, half-sleep confusion, or something like that. But I was awake. I knew I was awake. I saw the time, I was aware of where I was, and I remember the whole thing in a way that never felt like a dream. It started very early one morning. I woke up at around 5:30 a.m. It was the kind of waking where you open your eyes, look at the clock, realize it is still too early to be up, and begin to settle back down to go back to sleep. That was exactly what I thought I was about to do. I was still in bed, still in that early morning quiet, still expecting nothing more unusual than rolling over and drifting off again. But instead of going back to sleep, I saw something in front of me. There were 3 figures. An adult woman, an adult man, and a male child. I do not mean I imagined them vaguely or felt a presence and turned it into an image later in my mind. I mean I saw them. They were there in front of me in a way that was impossible to ignore. The experience was unlike anything I had ever seen before and unlike anything I had ever expected to see. It was not like seeing actual solid people standing in my room, and it was not like seeing a flat picture either. It was something in between and beyond both of those things. The best way I could ever describe it was that they looked almost holographic. They had a kind of three-dimensional presence, but they were not ordinary bodies standing there in the normal way living people stand in a room. They were in repose. That is the word that has always felt closest to right. They looked still and arranged, not active the way living people normally are. The woman was closest to me. The man and the boy were there as well. It was strange because my point of view felt unusual too. It was as if I was slightly above them while still being where I physically was. That part is hard to explain. It was like the image or vision had its own angle and space, and I was looking into it rather than just at it. Behind them was a bright light. That light is something I remember very clearly. It was not harsh in the sense of hurting my eyes, but it was strong and unmistakable. It lit the whole scene from behind them, and because of that, they stood out in a way that felt almost unreal. Not shadowy, exactly, but not fully ordinary either. The light made the whole thing feel separate from the room around me, as though I were looking into some other place or layer rather than simply seeing figures appear in my bedroom. The shock of it hit me immediately. I was terrified. I remember feeling as if I could hardly breathe. That kind of fear is difficult to describe because it is not the same as ordinary fear. It is not the fear of a loud noise in the night, or someone being in your house. It is the fear that comes when reality suddenly changes shape right in front of you and your mind has nothing ready to do with it. My body knew I was seeing something impossible, and that kind of knowledge creates a very deep panic. Even so, somehow I managed to ask a question. I asked, "Who are you?" That was the first thing I said. The woman turned her head and looked at me. Then she turned her head back again. All 3 of them had been looking upward until then, and after she looked at me, the whole vision dropped out of sight. That is the only way I can describe it. It did not fade. It did not dissolve into darkness slowly. It dropped, like an elevator suddenly descending out of view. One moment it was there in front of me. The next it sank down and disappeared, and the room went dark again. I was terrified. There is no softer word for it. I was scared to death. I lay there trying to understand what had just happened, but there was no understanding to be had. I had seen something impossible, something too clear and too strange to dismiss, and now it was gone. The room was normal again, but I was not. I remember the fear staying in my body long after the vision itself ended. My heart must have been pounding. My breathing must have been fast. I was fully awake, fully frightened, and completely alone with what I had just seen. I told no one. That part matters because people often assume that if something truly strange happens, the first thing you do is tell someone. But that is not always true. Sometimes the exact opposite happens. Sometimes something is so strange, so difficult to fit into any normal conversation, that silence feels safer. I did not tell anyone because I was afraid of how it would sound. I was afraid of being judged. I was afraid people would think I was crazy, or dramatic, or confused. And honestly, I was still trying to protect myself from the reality of what I had seen. Saying it out loud would have made it feel even more real. So I kept it to myself. Then, 3 weeks later, it happened again. That alone is one of the things that makes the whole story sit so heavily in my memory. If it had only happened once, perhaps I could have spent years trying to persuade myself it was some one-time strange experience. But it did not happen only once. It came back. And what is even stranger is that it came back while I was somewhere else entirely. This time I was at my brother's house. Again, it happened early in the morning. And again, I was awake. This time, though, the vision was different. Now it was only the woman. The man and the boy were gone. She was holding a telephone receiver. And she looked extremely upset. That image has stayed with me all these years. She appeared deeply stressed, deeply distressed, and crying. Whatever calm stillness had marked that first vision was gone from her now. This time she looked emotional, almost desperate. The scene felt more personal and more direct. As if I was no longer seeing a group presented before me but instead one person caught in some terrible emotional moment. Once again, I asked who she was. And once again, she looked at me. And once again, the vision dropped out of sight, just as before. Only this time, after it ended, I did not feel exactly the same as I had the first time. The first time I was mostly just terrified. This time I was still unsettled, of course, but curiosity had begun pushing in beside the fear. The repetition changed something. It made the experience feel less random and more like a message, or at least more like something with pattern and meaning. I still did not know what I was seeing, and I was still frightened by the strangeness of it, but now I also wanted to understand it. Why her? Why me? Why 3 weeks later? Why had she returned alone? Why was she holding a phone? Why did she look so upset? And most of all, who was she? I left the next morning to visit family in Minnesota. This all began in Washington State, but I was traveling then, and that trip ended up placing me in a very strange position. After experiencing something so unexplainable twice, I found myself somewhere else, away from the place where it had started, still carrying all those questions. And perhaps because I was desperate for some kind of answer, or perhaps because of the strange mood the whole thing had placed me in, I ended up going to a psychic fair. Even now, I can hear how strange that sounds. It was not the kind of place I would normally have gone looking for in my everyday life. But when you have something happen to you that does not fit into normal categories, you start reaching outside your normal world. You look in places you might once have laughed at. Not because you suddenly believe everything, but because you are searching. You want anyone anywhere to tell you something that makes sense of what you have experienced. So I sought out someone doing tarot readings. I had a reading done first, and then I told her what had happened. I told her about the visions. I told her about the woman, the man, and the boy. I told her about the light. I told her how afraid I was. And I told her the question that had probably been sitting at the center of everything by then. I was worried that I had somehow attracted something evil, or bad. That was my fear. Not just that I had seen something strange, but that by seeing it, or reacting to it, or somehow being open to it, I might now be involved with something dark. If you have no framework for experiences like that, your imagination runs in hard directions. You wonder if you have invited something in. You wonder if you are being followed. You wonder if some terrible spiritual mistake has been made without your meaning to make it. The woman at the fair took a deep breath. Then she seemed to go into what I can only describe as a trance. Now, whether that was real or theatrical or somewhere in between, I cannot say. I can only say what happened and what she told me. After a moment, she said no, I had not attracted anything evil. According to her, the woman I was seeing was caught in the astral plane. And she told me that if I ever saw her again, I should send her into the light behind her. That was the advice she gave me. Send her into the light. I walked away from that reading not exactly comforted, but not as afraid either. I still had no proof of anything. I still did not know if the tarot reader was right, and I still had no idea what the visions actually were. But I had been given something I had not had before, an action. A possible purpose. Instead of simply waiting and fearing another appearance, I now had something I could do if it happened again. Another 3 weeks passed. That 3-week pattern is one of the strangest parts to me. I still do not know why it happened in those intervals. There was no obvious reason for it. Nothing else in my life was moving in that rhythm. And yet that is how it happened. 3 weeks, then vision. 3 weeks, then vision again. When she appeared the third time, she looked different again. This time she looked very scared. Very defeated. She was still holding the phone. There was something about the way she appeared then that felt final, or at least deeply important. It was as if whatever state she was in had worn her down. She no longer seemed only upset in the way she had in the second vision. Now she seemed exhausted by fear, exhausted by some kind of struggle I could not understand. I asked her to look at me. And she did. She looked right at me. That eye contact mattered. It created a directness that made the moment feel almost unbearably real. This was no longer something happening vaguely in front of me. It felt like an exchange. A contact. A moment between two awarenesses. So I told her to turn and go into the light behind her. I told her that was where her husband and son were. To this day, I do not know exactly why I said that. I had no proof that the man and boy from the first vision were her husband and son. I had no factual information about any of these people. I did not know their names. I did not know their story. I did not know whether they were dead, living, symbolic, or something else entirely. Yet in that moment, the words came out of me with complete certainty. It was as if I knew it while speaking, even though I did not know how I knew it. I told her that was where they were. I told her to go into the light. She looked at me one last time. Then she turned. Then she walked into the light behind her. And once again, the picture dropped out of sight. After that, I never saw them again. Not her. Not the man. Not the child. That part of it ended there. And if the story ended there, maybe it would already be enough. Maybe even then it would have been one of the strangest things anyone could live through. But it did not fully end there. Something changed in me after that, or perhaps something in my perception opened in a way that never fully closed again. For many years afterward, and even now from time to time, I would see disembodied faces floating by. Sometimes it would be only faces. Other times it would be whole street scenes. These were not dreams. I was awake when they happened. Most often they happened at night or in the early morning, but not always. Very occasionally they happened during the day too, which made them harder to dismiss as simple sleep-related experiences. The faces would appear, disconnected from bodies, almost like flashes of presence passing through. The street scenes were even stranger because they sometimes looked complete, like glimpses into places I was not physically in. At times I wondered whether that could be remote viewing. At other times I wondered whether the entire experience had changed the way I interacted with whatever lies beyond ordinary sight. But the truth is, I have never found a full answer. That has been one of the hardest parts of living with this memory. I have spent years trying to understand it. I have looked for explanations. I have spoken to people who think in spiritual terms. I have spoken to people who think in psychological terms. I have listened to theories, descriptions, guesses, and interpretations. But the only explanation I ever really receive with any consistency is that somehow I helped someone cross over. Maybe that is what happened. Maybe the woman was trapped somewhere between states of being. Maybe the man and child I first saw were waiting for her. Maybe the bright light behind them was exactly what people so often describe when they talk about crossing from one place to another. Maybe her distress and the phone receiver had something to do with the circumstances of her death, or with the moment she was stuck in, replaying or reliving something she could not move beyond. Maybe the reason I told her that her husband and son were in the light was because some deeper part of me knew it. Maybe I did help her. But I still do not know for sure. That uncertainty has followed me all these years. I think that is why it took me 10 years to tell anyone. The experience was not only frightening. It was sacred in a strange way, intimate and impossible at the same time. I was afraid that once I spoke it out loud, people would flatten it. They would make jokes, offer shallow explanations, or dismiss it with a quick label that would not touch the real depth of what it felt like. Some experiences resist being spoken because the words always feel smaller than the event. And this was one of those. The first vision especially has never left me. I can still picture those three figures in repose. I can still picture the woman nearest to me, the bright light behind them, the strange angle of my own sight, as though I were slightly above and looking down. I can still feel the shock of waking and seeing them instead of darkness or ceiling or ordinary morning. I can still feel the panic in my chest when I asked who they were and the woman turned her head to look at me. Even now, just remembering that movement, the simple turn of her head, brings back some of the force of the moment. The second vision has a different feeling in my memory. It is more emotional. Less shocking, perhaps, because it was not the first, but in some ways sadder. She was alone. She was crying. She was holding the telephone. She looked like someone trapped inside some moment of terrible stress. It was no longer merely a mystery then. It became a human mystery. A human pain. Someone was suffering in front of me, someone I did not know, and I could do nothing except ask who she was. By the third vision, that helplessness changed. Or maybe it was replaced by responsibility. Because by then I had been told what to do, and when she appeared, something in me recognized that the moment mattered. When I asked her to look at me and she did, there was a kind of consent in that moment. A readiness. A last chance. And when I told her to turn and go into the light, it felt less like advice and more like permission. As though she needed someone on this side, or from wherever I was standing, to say it out loud. Go there. You can go. That is where they are. You do not have to stay here. If that is what happened, then the moment was not only strange. It was profoundly moving. Because what greater mystery is there than being part of someone's final release from fear, even if you do not understand the nature of the place they are leaving or entering? Still, I have always been careful not to become too certain. Certainty can become a trap in experiences like this. People want neat conclusions. They want to decide what everything was and then close the book. But that is not how this has felt to me. There is still too much I do not know. I do not know who the woman was. I do not know who the man and boy were, though I felt in that last vision that they were tied to her as husband and son. I do not know what the phone meant, though it felt important enough that she held it in both later visions. I do not know why it happened every 3 weeks. I do not know why it happened to me. That last question may be the one I have asked the most. Why me? There are people who spend their lives trying to have spiritual experiences, trying to see visions, trying to contact the dead, trying to cross some threshold of ordinary perception. I was not one of those people. I was not seeking this. I had not invited it. I did not wake each day hoping to see beings in light. If anything, I was unprepared for it in every possible way. So why did it happen to me? Was I simply open in some accidental way? Was I in the right place, mentally or spiritually, at the moment she needed someone? Was I always someone who could perceive things like this, and did not know until then? Or was that first event what opened the door to the later floating faces and street scenes? I do not know. The after effects make me think something changed. Before these visions, I had not lived with disembodied faces drifting past my awareness. I had not seen occasional full street scenes while awake. I had not moved through life with that sense that the boundary between ordinary sight and something else had become thinner. Afterward, that boundary no longer felt as solid. At times that has been unsettling. At times it has simply become part of life. There is something lonely about having experiences that most people either do not have or do not admit having. You become careful. Selective. You test the air before speaking. You learn which people can listen without immediately trying to reduce your experience to something manageable for themselves. You also begin to understand that not every truth can be proved in a way that satisfies others. Some truths remain personal because they happen in that private place where the seen and the felt come together. That does not make them less real. If anything, sometimes it makes them more real, because you have no outside structure to hold them. You carry them in memory, in body, in the changed shape of your life afterward. That is exactly how this has been for me. Even now, decades later, I can still feel the emotional tone of each part of it. The first was terror. The second was fear mixed with curiosity. The third was a solemn kind of compassion and urgency. After that came a long stretch of uncertainty, wondering, and occasional flashes of whatever else brushes close to vision but does not fully settle into it. I have thought many times about the light. What was it? Why was it always behind them? Why did it feel so significant even before anyone told me what it might mean? The light was not merely background. It was presence. It was destination. It was the one constant in the whole experience. Even when the figures changed, the light remained. That is why the tarot reader's words affected me so strongly. Send her into the light. It was the first thing anyone said that matched something I had already seen. It gave shape to what had otherwise been only image. And the woman walking into it in the final vision remains one of the most moving things I have ever witnessed. She looked at me. She turned. She walked. And then the image dropped and ended. There was no struggle then. No resistance. No dragging or pulling. She simply went. That alone gives me some peace when I think about it. Whatever else the experience was, it did not end in horror. It ended in movement towards something brighter. Towards something that, at least in that moment, felt right. I sometimes wonder about her story. Was she calling someone when something happened? Was the phone the final object in her hand at the time of death? Was she unable to let go of that moment because it connected somehow to her husband and son? Were they already gone when she came to me the first time, waiting in the light while she remained caught elsewhere? Or were the three figures not dead in the way we understand death, but symbols of a family moment, some emotional truth appearing in a language of images I could only partly understand? I cannot answer any of that. But human beings are story-making creatures, and when we cannot know, we still try to imagine. We try to honor what we saw by asking better questions, even if answers never come. What I know is this. I woke early one morning fully awake and saw three figures before me, lit from behind, in a way that did not belong to ordinary sight. 3 weeks later I saw the woman again, alone, crying and holding a phone. 3 weeks after that I saw her once more, frightened and defeated, and told her to go into the light behind her where her husband and son were. She went, and she never returned. That is the shape of what happened. Everything else is interpretation. For a long time, I was afraid the experience meant something bad had attached itself to me. But if anything, the years have made me feel less that way. The strange faces and scenes that sometimes appear are still unsettling, yes, but they do not carry the same sense of danger. They feel more like glimpses, intrusions of perception, windows opening for a second and then closing. I do not chase them. I do not invite them. I simply notice when they happen and continue on. If I learn anything from the main visions, it is that fear is not always the correct response to the unknown. The first time, fear was all I had. The second time, curiosity entered. The third time, compassion spoke. Perhaps that progression was part of the lesson. Perhaps when something strange touches us, The mind first recalls, then questions, and finally, if it can, responds with mercy. I think about that a lot. Because if what I truly did was help someone cross over, then the experience was not given to me as punishment or as attack. It was given to me as a task. A strange, frightening, sacred task that I never would have chosen, but one that nevertheless came and asked something of me. And perhaps that is why the memory still feels so alive after 20 years. Not because it scared me, though it did. Not because it was supernatural, though maybe it was. But because it involved another being's suffering and release, and because for one brief moment I was asked to stand at the edge of something far bigger than ordinary life and say the right words. Go into the light. That may sound simple when written on a page. In the moment, it felt like everything. I have often thought about how many people might have experiences like this and never tell anyone. I understand them now. Silence is easier than explanation. Silence protects the mystery from being laughed at. Silence allows you to keep the experience whole inside yourself instead of watching it get broken apart by other people's assumptions. That is why I stayed quiet for so long. But silence has a cost too. When you never speak an experience, it remains sealed in you. It cannot breathe. It cannot be shared. It cannot meet another person's recognition. Even if they do not fully understand, there is value in being heard without ridicule. Maybe that is one reason I eventually started telling it, carefully and selectively. Not because I needed validation, but because some experiences deserve witness. This one certainly did. And if I am honest, there has always been part of me that still wonders whether one day I will learn who she was. Perhaps through some strange coincidence. Perhaps through a story that surfaces years later. Perhaps never. Maybe the point was never for me to know her earthly identity. Maybe the point was only the encounter itself. That would make sense too. We do not always receive the full story in the moments that matter most. Sometimes we are given only enough to act, not enough to explain. That is what this felt like. I was given enough to see, enough to care, enough to speak, not enough to understand everything. And maybe that is why the only answer I ever really get when I try to explain it is the same one, that I helped someone cross over. It is not a complete answer, but perhaps it is the truest one available. I still remember the fear in her face the last time. I still remember the change when she turned toward the light. I still remember the absolute finality of never seeing her again. There is comfort in that final part. Because whatever she had been trapped in, whatever distress or confusion or sorrow had held her, it ended. I do not know where she went in any literal sense. I do not know what lies beyond that brightness. But I know she did not remain in the place where I had seen her suffering. That matters. And perhaps what matters too is that the experience left me changed, but not destroyed. It opened strange things in my life, yes. It left me with floating faces and occasional scenes I cannot explain. But it also left me with a different understanding of fear, mystery, and the possibility that human beings sometimes stand in relation to realities far beyond what our everyday senses can grasp. That idea no longer frightens me the way it once did. It humbles me. It reminds me that the world is wider than the ordinary daylight version of it. It reminds me that not everything can be measured before it can be meaningful. It reminds me that some encounters leave no proof behind except the changed life of the person who experienced them. That is where I have lived with this story for all these years. Not in certainty. Not in complete confusion either. But somewhere in between, holding what happened as honestly as I can. And if I had to say now, after all this time, what I believe most deeply about it, it would be this. I believe I saw a woman who was not at peace. I believe the light behind her mattered. I believe the man and the child were connected to her in a way that meant something essential. I believe the final words I spoke were somehow the right ones. And I believe that after she walked into that light, whatever bond had brought her to me was finished. That is why she never returned. That is why, when I think back on all of it, even through the strangeness, even through the lingering unanswered questions, the strongest feeling left is not horror. It is solemn gratitude. Gratitude that if someone was truly lost, she was no longer lost after that. Gratitude that fear did not stop me from speaking. Gratitude that for one moment, impossible as it sounds, I may have been able to help. That is the only meaning I have ever been able to live with fully. And in the end, maybe it is enough. A little over 2 years ago, in early October, something happened that I still do not like talking about too much. Even now, when I think back on it, I feel the same uneasy feeling in my chest that I felt that night and for a long time after. I do not really know the perfect place to begin, because the whole thing sounds strange when I say it out loud. But before I tell it, I want to make one thing very clear. I am a strong Christian, and I truly believe you should never play around with evil. Some people think dark things are just stories, jokes, or something to laugh about. I do not believe that anymore. Maybe I should not have gone where I went. Maybe I should have known better from the start. But at that time, I was young, curious, and trying to impress my friends. What happened after that made me look at everything very differently. Back then, a few of my friends and I had a stupid habit. We had been going around toilet papering people every week. It was one of those dumb things that feels funny when you are young and hanging around with your friends late at night. We were not trying to be dangerous or violent. We just thought it was hilarious to sneak around, throw toilet paper into trees and bushes, and leave a mess for people to wake up to the next morning. It became our little tradition for a while. Every week, somebody would throw out a name or a place, and we would pile into a car, wear dark clothes, and go act like idiots. Around that same time, there were always stories going around about a so-called satanic cult not too far from our high school. It was one of those stories that everybody seemed to know something about, but no one seemed to know everything about. People talked about it in whispers or in that half-joking, half-serious way people use when they want to scare each other. It was supposed to be out in a lonely area, maybe 10 minutes from the high school, somewhere away from houses and regular traffic. The kind of place where you would not just happen to end up by accident. The kind of place that already felt strange in your mind before you ever saw it. By this point, we had all already graduated. It was 2005, and even though we were technically out of school, we still acted like high school kids half the time. We thought it would be funny, in a stupid reckless way, to sneak onto the cult's property and fork and toilet paper them the way we had done to other people. Looking back now, it sounds unbelievably foolish. At the time, though, it felt like the kind of wild story we would laugh about forever if we pulled it off. It was not enough anymore to just mess with regular people's yards. We wanted something bigger, darker, more exciting. At least that is how we thought of it then. Some of my friends had been drinking that night, but I had not, so I ended up driving my friend's car. There were 5 of us all together. Jesse L., Jesse D., Alex, Andy, and me. We all dressed in dark clothing, and we wore masks because, in our minds, we were going on some secret mission. The truth is, we were just being stupid. But when you are with a group and everyone is feeding off the same energy, bad ideas start to sound like good ones. Even though I went along with it, I was scared before we even got there. I have always been the kind of person who wanted to see something real with my own eyes. I had heard stories all my life, and part of me always wondered what was actually true. Was there really evil in places like that? Were there really dark spiritual things that people could invite into their lives? I do not mean that I wanted to be harmed. I just mean I had that human curiosity that makes you want proof. That night, though, as we drove closer and closer to that place, I had this deep feeling that maybe I was finally about to see something for myself. And that thought was more frightening than exciting. We parked down the road near what looked like some kind of lumber yard. I do not remember every detail of it now, but I remember it was not a place where anyone would want to get caught hanging around in the middle of the night. It looked rough and quiet and private, the sort of place where a stranger would stand out immediately. We got out of the car and tried to stay low and quiet. The moon was pretty full that night, or close to it. I remember that clearly because even though it was nighttime, there was still a lot of pale light around us. It was not bright like daylight, of course, but it was bright enough to see where we were going without feeling completely blind. The open land, the fence, the empty distance around us, all of it looked strange under that moonlight. We had to climb through a fence to get in. Even that part felt wrong. The metal, the quiet, the effort of getting through without making too much noise, all of it made me feel like we were crossing a line we should not be crossing. There were 5 of us, but none of us felt loud anymore. All the joking had died down by then. Everyone moved more slowly. Everyone seemed more alert. I think even the ones trying to act brave were starting to feel that this place was different from somebody's front yard in town. Once we got through the fence, we found ourselves in a wide grassy pasture. We moved through it slowly, trying not to make much sound. There was that odd silence you only get in remote places at night, where every small noise stands out too much. We were not talking much. Mostly we just kept looking around and trying to figure out where exactly we were supposed to go. I remember feeling the open space around us and how exposed we were. There was no easy place to hide. No nearby houses. No traffic sounds. Nothing familiar. Just moonlight, grass, and that strange feeling that we were being watched even when we could not see anyone. Then, all of a sudden, we heard a loud eerie noise. To me, it sounded like an old screen door slamming shut. It was not a soft sound. It was not something small or easy to ignore. It came through the night suddenly and sharply, and every single one of us froze the second we heard it. We bent down at the knees instinctively, almost crouching, like we were expecting someone to come out at any second. It is strange how the body reacts before the mind even has time to think. 1 second we were walking. The next second we were down low and holding our breath, listening. As far as we could tell, nobody else was around. We looked and listened as hard as we could. No voices. No footsteps. No lights moving toward us. Nothing that clearly explained where that sound had come from. That made it worse somehow. If we had seen somebody, at least we could have understood it. But there was just that one loud sound and then silence again. We stayed like that for several minutes, hardly moving, trying to decide if we should keep going or turn around. Eventually, because we had already come that far and because no one wanted to be the first person to admit they were scared, we continued. We kept moving until we reached an area that felt more like a small forest, or at least a more wooded part of the property. There were trails through it, and there was a small building there too. It looked like a very old little church. That was not what I had expected at all. For some reason, when I had heard cult property, I imagined something darker, maybe something obviously strange or threatening. But this building looked like an old church. On it were the words, Church of Christ. That made the whole thing even more confusing. There was a light on in or near the church, which instantly made us curious. We went closer and tried to get in, but the door was locked. So there we were, 5 idiots dressed in dark clothes and masks, standing around a locked little church in the middle of nowhere under a full moon, trying to see inside like we were in some low-budget horror movie. It sounds ridiculous now, but at the time it felt deeply unsettling. We spent at least 15 minutes around that building trying to look through windows and cracks, but the inside was too dark to make out much. Even with the light outside, we could not really see what was in there. I remember staring at the darkness inside and feeling like something might be staring back. At one point I heard something move across the floor inside. It was not a huge crash or anything dramatic, but it was enough to make me go still again. Something shifted or moved in there. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe it was the old building settling. But in that moment, with all the fear and tension already built up inside me, it did not feel normal. And still, nothing really happened beyond that. No people came out. No one caught us. No big scary figure stepped into the moonlight. No ritual or anything like that. After all that fear, all that build-up, it almost felt like a letdown. We had come there expecting something, and instead we were just standing around a locked old church in the dark. So eventually, with nothing else happening, we gave up and left. We never even ended up toilet papering the place. We had brought the stuff, and that had been the whole point of going, but by then no one seemed to feel like actually doing it anymore. It was as if the mood had changed too much. like the joke had worn off somewhere between the fence and the little church. So we started walking back down the dirt road toward the lumber yard where the car was parked. I had the keys, since I was the one driving. We got back to the car and I tried to unlock the door. The key would not work. I tried again. Nothing. I handed it to my friend and he tried. Still nothing. It made no sense. This was his car. It was his key. There was no reason it suddenly should not unlock the door. The car had one of those old keychain things with lock and unlock buttons, but they did not really work right most of the time. So none of us expected much from that. Then, without me pressing anything, the car alarm suddenly went off. The lights started flashing. The sound exploded into the quiet night and scared us all half to death. Then, just like that, the doors unlocked. At that point, none of us stood there trying to think it through. We all piled into the car as fast as we could. Part of the reason was fear from everything that had already happened, and part of it was because supposedly the man who owned the lumber yard was mean as hell and not someone you wanted catching you on his property in the middle of the night. So we were ready to get out of there either way. I put the car in drive and started heading down the road. Then, all of a sudden, the lights shut off. Not the engine. Not the whole car. Just the lights. 1 second we had headlights and could see the road. The next second it was complete darkness ahead of us. I did not touch anything. That is the part that has always stuck with me. I did not bump the switch. I did not turn anything off. The lights just went out. Of course I slammed on the brakes immediately, because when your headlights die in the middle of a dark road, instinct takes over. Everyone in the car was yelling and trying to figure out what had happened. Then we had to scramble around and find the switch, and when we did, the lights came back on. Now maybe there is some normal explanation for that. Maybe it was a mechanical issue. Maybe the car had electrical problems. Maybe something got bumped without me realizing it. I have thought through all those possibilities many times. But the timing of it, coming right after the alarm going off on its own and the doors unlocking by themselves, made it feel like something was messing with us. In that moment, I could not shake the feeling that whatever had been there, whether spirit or demon or something else entirely, was saying, "Don't come here and mess with me." Maybe that sounds dramatic. Maybe it was. But that is exactly how it felt. We got out of there and went home, and on the drive back I do not remember anyone acting the same as before. Nobody was laughing the way they had at the start of the night. Nobody was bragging about how funny it all was. We were all more quiet. Maybe some of that was alcohol wearing off for the others. Maybe some of it was just the late hour. But I think a lot of it was that the whole trip had gone wrong in a way none of us expected. It did not feel like harmless fun anymore. Still, what happened that night was not even the part that scared me the most. The scariest thing happened the next day when I got home. I lived about 25 miles from where that so-called cult property was. So we were not talking about something close by. It was not like I was still in that same area. The next afternoon, sometime around 3 or 4, I pulled into my driveway. The sun was bright and glaring hard enough that it made everything outside look washed in light. As I drove up, I noticed movement and shapes near the driveway and yard. At first, I could not tell exactly what I was looking at because of the glare. It looked like cats. Several of them. Now I had one cat of my own, but that was it. So seeing multiple cats in my driveway immediately caught my attention. I got out of the car and looked more closely. There were 3 cats. All black. All identical. They were not fully grown yet, but they were not tiny kittens either. Just 3 young black cats, standing there like they had every reason in the world to be in my yard even though I had never seen them before in my life. I remember staring at them and feeling a really deep, uncomfortable feeling spread through me. I love cats. I have always loved cats. Under normal circumstances, I would have thought they were cute. But not these. These did not feel normal to me. Maybe that was because of everything that had happened the night before. Maybe that was because there were 3 of them, all black, all appearing together the day after I went sneaking around a place I believed might have evil tied to it. I do not know. I only know that they scared me. My dad had no idea where they had come from. They had just appeared. That was the part that really got to me. It was not like we lived in a place where random animals were always showing up in groups like that. And even if they had wandered over from somewhere, why 3 identical black cats? Why the very next day? Why after that particular night? I started telling a few people about everything that had happened. I needed to talk about it because by then the whole thing was bothering me badly. My sister worked with a man who was supposedly a ghost hunter on the side, or at least someone who was into that kind of thing. She told him about the story, and according to her, he said the cats were a warning sign and not something to take lightly. He said bad things come in threes. Now whether he really knew what he was talking about, I cannot say. But hearing that only made me feel worse. Because I was already unsettled by the 3 cats, and suddenly someone was telling me the number itself mattered. That it was a sign. That it was connected to something darker. I decided I wanted those cats gone. I did not want them around my house. I did not want to wake up and see them again. I did not want to feed them or let them stay. Maybe that sounds mean, but at the time I was genuinely frightened. So I put them in a box and drove them out away from town, maybe 7 miles or so from where I lived. I was just trying to get rid of them and be done with the whole thing. I wanted distance between my house and whatever I thought those cats might mean. A friend had told me a small road in the country would be a good place to let them out. So I headed that way. But even that did not go normally. An all-black car started following me. At first I noticed it behind me, and I did not think much of it. Cars follow each other on roads all the time. But then I turned onto another road, and it stayed with me. Then I put on my blinker to turn onto the small road my friend had mentioned. It was called Clinton Trail. It was a small road, not the kind of place you just happened to turn onto by coincidence unless you had a reason. The black car put on its blinker too, like it was going to follow me down there. That was enough for me. I thought, forget this. I kept going straight instead. I did not want to be trapped on some tiny road in the country with a strange black car following me while I had 3 black cats in a box in my car the day after I had been messing around at what people called a satanic cult. Maybe all of that can be explained normally. Maybe the driver was just going the same way. Maybe the cats were just random strays. Maybe my fear was making every little thing seem connected. But in that moment, it all felt tied together in a way I could not ignore. I eventually got out, got rid of the cats, and came home. And I never went back to that cult property again. To this day, I still do not know exactly what happened. I cannot tell you with absolute certainty that a demon or spirit was messing with us. I cannot prove that the cult stories were true. I cannot prove that the old church had anything dark connected to it. I cannot prove that the car alarm, the headlights, the black cats, or the following car were supernatural. I understand that some people will hear all this and say there are normal explanations for every part of it. Maybe there are. Maybe if you separate each event by itself, you can explain each one away. But when I lived it, it did not feel separate. That is the thing people sometimes do not understand about experiences like this. It is not always one huge impossible event. Sometimes it is a series of smaller things, each one strange on its own, but together creating a feeling that something is very wrong. That is what happened to me. There was the screen door sound in the pasture with nobody around. There was the movement inside the locked church. There was the key not working in the car. The alarm going off by itself. The doors unlocking on their own. The headlights shutting off while I was driving. Then the 3 black cats at my house the next day. Then the all-black car following me while I tried to get rid of them. Maybe any one of those things alone would not have meant much. But all of them together, all connected to that same night, made it feel like a warning. And if there is one thing I took away from the whole experience, it is this: do not mess around with evil for entertainment. At the time, we thought we were just being funny. We thought it would make a wild story. We thought sneaking onto that place would be exciting. But there are some doors you should not walk toward just because you are curious. There are some places and some things you should leave alone. Whether that place was truly tied to anything satanic or not, we went there with the wrong spirit ourselves. We were disrespectful. We were mocking something we did not understand. And if there really are dark things in this world, then that kind of attitude is dangerous. That is why I have always looked back on that night as more than just a prank gone weird. It felt like a line was crossed. And whether what followed was spiritual, psychological, or some mix of both, the fear was real. I still remember the moonlight over that pasture. I still remember how still we all went when we heard that first loud eerie sound. I still remember the small old church with Church of Christ written on it, standing there in the woods like something out of a dream. I still remember the dark inside that building and the sound of something moving across the floor. I still remember the panic in the car when the alarm screamed and the lights flashed, and then the doors unlocked on their own. I still remember the absolute blackness when the headlights shut off on that road. And more than anything, I remember pulling into my driveway the next day and seeing those 3 black cats waiting there in the sunlight like they had been sent. Maybe some people will always say that is not enough to prove anything. Maybe they are right. But I know what I felt. I know how that whole thing changed the way I think. And I know I never had any desire to go near that place again. Even now, when I tell the story, I can still feel that same uneasiness. I still think about the timing of everything. I still think about the warning I was told those cats represented. I still think about how foolish we were to go there in the first place. Some people go looking for signs and strange experiences because they think it will make life more exciting. I think that is a mistake. You may see something. You may feel something. And when you do, you may wish you had never gone looking. So no, maybe this story is not the craziest thing anyone has ever heard. Maybe it does not sound unbelievable enough for some people. But it happened. And it was enough for me. People have often told us that our son has an old soul. From the time he was a baby, there was always something different about him. Not different in a bad way, not in a way that worried us at first, but in a quiet and unusual way that made us feel he had come into this world carrying a kind of peace most children do not seem to have. Even now, when I look back over his early years, I still cannot fully explain him. He has always seemed calm, thoughtful, and strangely settled, as if he came into our family already knowing far more than a little child should know. When he was teething, he never woke us in the middle of the night screaming the way so many babies do. He might fuss a little now and then, but he never put us through those long nights of crying and restlessness that so many parents expect. Even when he was sick, he still played almost as hard as he did when he was well. He did not lie around whining or making a great drama out of not feeling good. He just kept going in his own quiet way. When he was only 2 years old, he would toddle around the house trying to help us with things. He was not the kind of child who tore into everything, pulled things down, broke things, or created chaos in every room he entered. He was careful. He was observant. He seemed content just to be near us, taking everything in and trying to be part of daily life. He never truly went through what people call the terrible twos. Then he skipped right over the kind of rough behavior people joke about at 3 years old too. Now that he is 4, he is still the same way. Calm. Easygoing. Laid back. He takes almost everything in stride. He is so different from our daughter when she was his age that it still amazes us sometimes. Our daughter was bright and wonderful in her own way, but she was intense, emotional, and full of energy from the moment she could move. Our son, on the other hand, has always felt as though he carries some deep inner stillness with him. My husband and I have often looked at each other and said how blessed we feel to have such a well-mannered and peaceful little boy in our lives. At first, that was all it seemed to be. We simply thought he had a very easy nature. But then, little by little, things started happening that made us wonder if there was more to it than that. Some of the things he did when he was very small had seemed odd at the time, but once he got older and began speaking in fuller sentences, we started to understand that those strange little habits might mean something. He was beginning to let us into his world. It felt as though he had been living with certain experiences all along and was only now finding the words to tell us about them. Some of it unnerved us, I will admit that. But in the bigger picture, it felt like he was trusting us enough to share what he saw and what he knew. Of course, because he was little, there were times when we had to figure out what he really meant. At first, some of what he said was not very clear, and we may have jumped to a few conclusions too quickly. But as he got older and his words became more precise, the things he described became much more detailed. He gave us descriptions that were specific enough to make us stop and listen more carefully. He was not just making vague comments or repeating phrases he had heard from adults. He was telling us about what he called things bouncing around, and he seemed to speak about those things as if they were a normal part of his life. Anyone who has children knows how confusing language development can be in the beginning. When a child first starts speaking more, it often sounds like a mix of real words, broken words, repeated sounds, and little phrases that do not always fit together. You learn to guess what they mean. You listen closely. You smile and nod and try to build meaning out of sounds that only partly make sense. With our son, though, there was something extra happening. He did use English, and that was really the only language he had steady exposure to. Our neighbors spoke Spanish, but they did not speak it to him often enough for that to explain anything. Yet half the time, what came out of his mouth did not sound like English at all. He would make a series of sounds that none of us recognized. Some of it sounded like clicking. Some of it sounded almost like humming. Some of it sounded like a language with a pattern, as if he knew exactly what he was saying even if none of us had any idea. At first we thought maybe it was just a normal speech issue. Families on both sides began working hard with him, trying to help him pronounce words clearly. Everyone listened, corrected gently, repeated words slowly, and encouraged him to sound things out. But even with all that, half the time he still seemed to slip into this other way of speaking. That was when we started looking into speech therapy. At first, that seemed like the most practical explanation. Maybe he was just having trouble with words. Maybe his mouth was moving faster than his mind. Or maybe his mind was moving faster than his mouth. Maybe he had developed his own system of sounds the way some children do. We were not trying to overreact. We were just trying to help him communicate more clearly, especially since we could tell he did have a lot to say. At the same time, we had always enjoyed his imagination. Even now, he often prefers to be alone with what he calls his friends, though he does not mind when we come into the room. He tells us stories about them very naturally. Their names are Belle and Justin. He talks about them as if they are simply part of his daily life. Not in a secretive or frightened way, but in a relaxed and happy way. He seems perfectly comfortable with them. He plays with them, talks to them, and then tells us things they said or did. We did not want to crush that kind of imagination. Children need space to imagine. They need space to tell stories. In our late 30s and early 40s, my husband and I both know how easy it is to lose that ability to let your mind tell you something beautiful or strange. Adults become practical too quickly. We did not want to strip that away from him if it was only harmless imagination. There was another reason we were cautious about taking him to therapy too quickly. Our daughter had been through therapy with a psychologist before, and that whole experience had been explosive in ways that belonged to a different story entirely. Even though we knew speech therapy was a different thing, with different children, different goals, and different methods, it still made us uneasy that the offices were in the same building where we had taken her. That building already carried stress for us, and at the time it was the only place we could afford to take him. In the end, he went to 2 sessions. The first session was completely video and audio taped for the full hour. I did not like that at all. Maybe some parents would not have thought much of it, but it bothered me. I could not shake the feeling that years from now someone might be going through old records, pull out those tapes, and there would be my innocent little boy up on the screen, saying things nobody understood. I could not even explain exactly why that upset me so much. I did not really imagine anything terrible happening because of it, but I felt a strong unease. There was something about capturing him that way, in that vulnerable stage, that felt wrong to me. During the second session, the therapist showed us small parts of the first tape session. We watched and listened while she pointed out that, at least in her opinion, it looked like he was talking to someone and then waiting for a response. She watched the tape and shook her head in that thoughtful way professionals do when they are trying to sound careful but are also forming their own ideas. She said that from an initial observation, it appeared he was having fun with a friend and had made up a language that the two of them could use for secret conversations. She did not seem alarmed by it. To her, it was more of an imaginative behavior than a true speech problem. But then she recommended a psychologist. That made us uneasy all over again. After 2 consultations, my husband and I decided not to move forward with any more therapy at that point. We chose instead to be patient and simply work with him ourselves. We would teach him to slow down when he spoke. We would encourage him to enunciate his words more clearly. That, we decided, would be our solution for the time being. There was nothing in his life at that point pointing to some obvious psychological issue. He was loving, calm, steady, affectionate, and generally very happy. He did not seem distressed. He did not seem withdrawn in a frightening way. He just seemed to have trouble with words sometimes, and perhaps a very active inner life. We were not eager to turn that into some bigger problem before we had reason to. Then one day, he said something that changed the way we looked at all of it. We have always tried to have an open relationship with our children. We want them to feel they can come to either one of us about anything. Of course, like any parents, we do not always do everything perfectly, but we do try. We try to listen. We try to keep an open mind. We try to help, support, and love them through whatever they are going through. Our family situation has also made life, faith, and illness very present in the home. My terminally ill father-in-law lives with us, and every day feels like a grace-filled extension of time. Religion is a big part of our lives, but even with that, we are very careful about how we talk around our 4-year-old son. We do not sit around discussing in detail the ins and outs of life before birth or after death with him. If there are deeper spiritual conversations, they are usually with our daughter, and usually behind a closed door, partly out of respect for my father-in-law, who is living so close to that edge between this life and the next. In other words, our son had not been given some detailed lesson about heaven, souls, choosing parents, or anything like that. That is why what he said startled us so much. One day we were outside looking at Daddy's race car. My husband races a mini stock locally. It is nothing huge or fancy, not some glamorous professional setup, just an old Mustang that he works on and races because he loves it. Our son was sitting in the driver's seat, pretending and playing the way little boys do when they sit in their father's car and imagine themselves grown up. We were all relaxed. It was an ordinary family moment. Then, out of nowhere, he said something that stopped both of us cold. He said, "This is why I chose you, Daddy." He said it so naturally, so calmly. Not as if he were telling a joke. Not as if he were repeating a line from a cartoon. He said it as though he were speaking a simple fact. My husband smiled, thinking at first that this was just another one of our son's imaginative little comments. So he played along lightly and asked him how he had been able to choose him when he had been such a surprise, a miracle baby that Mama and Daddy had not expected. And then our son explained. He told us that while he was up in heaven, checking out all the mamas and daddies and trying to pick the perfect ones, he noticed Sissy first. He said she needed help. Then he noticed Daddy. He said that he would sit on a cloud with his feet hanging down and swinging while he watched him. He liked what he saw. Then he started checking me out too. He said he knew something was keeping Mama from having another baby, but he wanted us anyway, so he came. He said Daddy needed someone else to love because he had such a good heart, and there was enough love to go around. He said Daddy would need help with his hobbies and needed a boy to hang out with. He said all of that in the simple, matter-of-fact way only a child can. There was no performance in it. No dramatic pause. No looking around to see how we reacted. He just said it as if he were remembering something obvious. My husband and I looked at each other in shock. Because the truth is, there were facts behind those words that made them harder to dismiss. Between the birth of our daughter, who is now 15, and the birth of our son, who is now 4, we had 3 miscarriages. Not 1. 3. Eventually, doctors told us that I was simply not a natural baby carrier. Those were not their exact words maybe, but it was the meaning. We were told that we should just be happy with the child we already had and accept that there likely would not be any others. Hearing that was devastating. It is a strange thing to have someone tell you to be grateful and let go of a dream at the same time. We loved our daughter deeply, of course. But there was still grief in being told there would probably be no more children. And then, against all expectation, I became pregnant again. Even then, the pregnancy was difficult almost from the start. At 3 months, I began having serious problems. I nearly lost him. I was placed on complete bed rest. I was deeply depressed during part of that time, and in that state I had what I can only describe as a powerful spiritual experience. I was introduced to my spirit guide, a white buffalo, who in my understanding quite literally carried me through that dark time. Some people may not understand or accept that language, but that is how I experienced it. That spiritual presence gave me strength when I had very little of my own. Then there is his appearance. I am Italian. In all the generations my parents know of, there are no blondes and no redheads in the family. My husband is half Cherokee Indian and quarter Blackfoot. His father is Cherokee. His mother is Cherokee and Blackfoot. There are no blondes there either. And yet our son is blonde and blue-eyed. Even that felt like one more piece of a puzzle we could never quite fit together in a simple way. Then there is his name, which contains the number 3. 3 miscarriages. 3 years old when he started saying things that made sense in a new way. So many 3s around him. I do not know enough about numerology to say what it means, if anything. In truth, I am not even sure I believe numerology determines much of anything. But the number kept appearing, and it was hard not to notice it. My guide and my son also share the same hair color. I do not know what to make of that either. Maybe it means nothing. Maybe it means more than I understand. But when you are living inside a story like this, you begin to notice every detail. You begin to hold each one up to the light, and ask whether it belongs to a pattern or whether it is only coincidence. And sometimes coincidence begins to feel like a very thin explanation. The heaven story especially has stayed with us. Because where did it come from? No one had sat him down and taught him that babies choose their parents from heaven. No one had explained to him that he was not expected to come. No one had told him that something had once kept Mama from having another baby. No one had explained that Daddy carried old hurts from family struggles and needed another child to love. No one had given him that language. Yet he spoke as if he knew. He spoke as if he remembered watching us before he was born and making a choice. It was not just what he said, but the tone in which he said it. He sounded older than his years. That is the best way I can explain it. He was still very much a little boy. He played, laughed, imagined, and lived like a child. But every now and then he would say something that seemed to come from somewhere deeper and older than 4 years of life. It was as though another layer of awareness sat quietly beneath his easygoing little boy nature, and from time to time it would rise to the surface and speak. That is one reason why so many people have told us he has an old soul. If it were only the heaven story, perhaps we could have laughed it off more easily. If it were only the made-up language, perhaps we could have settled more comfortably into the idea that he was imaginative and verbal in an unusual way. If it were only the calm personality, maybe we would have just counted ourselves lucky and moved on. But all of it together made him feel unusual in a way that was hard to ignore. Even his imaginary friends feel different from the way many children describe imaginary friends. He does not speak of Belle and Justin in a frantic or dramatic way. He is not frightened of them. He does not seem pressured by them. He simply talks about them as if they are there. As if they share space with him. Sometimes he seems happier alone with them than with other children, though he does not reject us when we join him. It is almost like he lives in 2 worlds at once without being troubled by it. The ordinary world of family, toys, food, cars, and daily life, and another softer, stranger world where conversations continue even when no visible person is present. When he slips into that made-up language, I still do not know what to think. Part of me still wonders whether it is exactly what the therapist first suggested. Maybe he and these friends, real or imaginary, have developed a secret language of their own. Children do that sometimes. They invent sounds, codes, and private systems that make perfect sense to them and no one else. But another part of me wonders whether it is something stranger, something remembered. Something that does not come from this life or from ordinary learning. The clicking and humming sounds have a rhythm to them. They do not sound random to me. They sound structured, as if he knows exactly when and how to use them. That is part of what made the therapist's taped comments so unsettling. She said it looked as though he was talking to someone and then waiting for an answer. That remains one of the most important observations anyone else has made about him. Because that is exactly how it feels when you watch him sometimes. He is not merely babbling. He is interacting, speaking, pausing, listening, responding. It gives the strange impression that a conversation is taking place, even when only one voice is audible to us. And yet, for all of this, he is not a troubled child. That is important to say. He is not dark. He is not afraid. He is not violent. He is not shut down. He is gentle, kind, and deeply loving. He is easy to soothe and easy to enjoy. He helps. He watches. He absorbs things. He does not seem burdened by what he knows or sees. If anything, he seems completely at peace with it. The discomfort often belongs more to us, the adults, than to him. That may be the hardest part as a parent. When your child shows signs of something you do not understand, your first instinct is to protect them. But from what? If the child is not in distress, what exactly are you protecting them from? The world's judgment? Doctors who want to label everything? Family members who dismiss what they cannot explain? Or perhaps from spiritual things you cannot see clearly yourself? Parenting always involves making choices in uncertainty. But this felt like uncertainty of a much deeper kind. We did not want to push him too hard in one direction or the other. We did not want to dismiss everything and risk ignoring something important. We also did not want to overreact and make him feel broken for being different. So we have mostly listened. We have paid attention. We have let him talk. We have tried gently to improve his speech and help him slow down when he speaks English, while also quietly wondering what exactly that other language might be and where it comes from. The heaven story still returns to me often. I picture him sitting in the driver's seat of that old Mustang, speaking in that calm little voice about sitting on a cloud with his feet hanging down, watching us, trying to choose the perfect mama and daddy. There was such innocence in the image, and yet such wisdom too. A child choosing a family not because they were perfect, but because he saw what they needed. He said Sissy needed help. He said Daddy needed another person to love. He said he knew something was keeping Mama from having another baby, but he came anyway because he wanted us. What child invents that kind of explanation? Maybe some children do. Maybe children are capable of insight far beyond what adults give them credit for. Or maybe some children really do carry memories from before birth, and then slowly lose them as they get older. I do not know. But I know that when he spoke, it did not feel like fantasy in the usual playful sense. It felt like a memory told in a child's vocabulary. Then there is the question of why he seems older than 4. That too is hard to explain. His calmness is part of it, yes. But it is also the way he watches people. The way he seems to understand emotional things he has not been taught. The way he does not get pulled into chaos the way most children do. It is not that he acts like a little adult in a stiff or unnatural way. He is still playful and little. But inside that, there is a steadiness that feels very old. Some people call that an old soul. Maybe that is the simplest way to say it. An old soul is one of those phrases people use when they see wisdom, patience, or gravity in someone too young to have gained it through ordinary life experience. Maybe it is only personality. Maybe it is the way some children are born. Or maybe there truly are souls who have passed through more than one life, carrying traces of what they learned before. I cannot say. I was not someone who thought deeply about these things before my own child began speaking in ways that made me question everything I assumed about how life begins. And still, I keep coming back to the small details. The 3 miscarriages. The difficult pregnancy. The white buffalo guide. The blonde hair and blue eyes that seemed to come from nowhere in the family line. The number 3 in his name. The way he slipped between English and that humming clicking language. The way he spoke of Belle and Justin. The way the therapist observed him waiting for answers. The way he told us, so gently and directly, that he had chosen us. All those details sit together in my mind like pieces from different puzzles that somehow belong to the same picture. I suppose what I want, more than anything, is an explanation. Not because I want to explain him away, but because I want to understand him better. How did he come up with the heaven story if no one taught it to him? Why does he sometimes seem so much older than his age? What is the made-up language, if it is only made up at all? Why does it sometimes feel like he is seeing or hearing things beyond what we do? And why, despite all that, does he remain so peaceful? If there is something extraordinary about him, it does not seem to have harmed him. That is one thing I cling to. Whatever this is, it has not made him fearful or troubled. It has simply made him unusual. He is still our sweet little boy. He still sits in race cars, plays with his friends, smiles at us, and moves through the house like a little calm light. The mystery around him does not erase the ordinary sweetness of who he is. If anything, it deepens it. Sometimes I wonder if we adults are the ones who make these things harder than they are. Maybe children know things we forget. Maybe they carry memories, impressions, or awareness from places we no longer remember because growing older closes us down. Maybe what we call imagination is sometimes memory mixed with present life in ways we cannot separate cleanly. Maybe his made-up language is not made up at all, at least not in the way we mean it. Or maybe all of this is simply the beautiful strangeness of childhood, and someday he will outgrow it and barely remember any of it. That thought makes me sad sometimes. Because as unnerving as it can be, there is also something beautiful in the way he moves through the world. He does not seem trapped by its hard edges the way adults are. He still lives close to wonder, close to mystery, close to something unseen but not, in his experience, frightening. There is innocence in that. There is also grace. So for now, we watch and listen. We love him. We try not to rush in and name everything before it has shown us what it is. We teach him words. We let him tell his stories. We smile when he speaks about Belle and Justin. We remember the therapist's strange comment about him talking to someone and waiting for answers. And we hold on to that extraordinary moment in the race car, when our little 4-year-old son told us he had chosen us from heaven because Sissy needed help, Daddy needed more love to give, and he wanted us badly enough to come even though something was standing in the way. Maybe one day we will understand more. Maybe one day he will say something else that makes it all clearer. Or maybe the mystery will remain, and all we will ever have are these scattered moments that seem too meaningful to dismiss, and too strange to fully explain. Whatever the case, I know this much. He has changed the way I think about children. He has changed the way I think about souls. And he has made me wonder whether some little ones arrive in this world carrying more memory, more purpose, and more peace than we ever imagined. That may not be a full explanation. But for now, it is the closest truth I have. The first thing I should say is that my uncle was not an easy man for everyone to deal with. I want to be honest about that, because if I am going to tell this story, then I want to tell it fairly. He drank a lot, more than he should have, and when he drank, he could become a little too much for some people. He could be loud. He could be overbearing. He could talk too much, argue too much, and make people tired even when he did not mean to. He was the kind of man who could walk into a room and change the whole feeling of it, for better or worse, depending on the day and depending on who was around him. Not everyone had the patience for him, and that is just the truth. But that is not the whole truth about him. The way I remember my uncle, He was also outrageously funny. He could make you laugh when you did not even want to laugh. He had that kind of wild energy where even his stories, even when they made no sense, somehow became entertaining. He could turn a normal conversation into something ridiculous in a matter of seconds. Underneath all of that, he was kind-hearted too. He treated me and my siblings very well. He never made us feel like we were a burden to him. He was good to us in the ways that mattered, and for that reason I always had a soft place in my heart for him, even when I was old enough to understand that adults saw him very differently from the way children sometimes do. My mother was the only one among his siblings who would really let him stay at her home. The others would not. Some of that came from the way he lived. Some of it came from the drinking. Some of it came from old family history, hurt feelings, and all the complicated things that grow inside families over many years. Every family has those things. Sometimes they are spoken aloud, and sometimes they sit under the surface where everyone feels them but nobody wants to touch them directly. In our family, my uncle was one of those people who carried a lot of those tensions around him. He was loved, but he was also difficult. He was welcome in some places and not in others. My mother, for whatever reason, kept her door open to him when the others would not. That was the kind of man he was to us. Complicated. Hard to handle at times. But funny, warm, and good-hearted in the ways I still remember. Then he died. Death has a strange way of gathering together all the pieces of a person at once. Suddenly people start speaking in past tense. They begin remembering everything at the same time. The good and the bad. The kindness and the trouble. The laughter and the pain. A person who was once just part of everyday life becomes a subject people sit around and talk about as if they are trying to hold on to him by speaking. That is how it felt after my uncle passed. We had the repast at my aunt's house. Everyone was there, or at least it felt like everyone was there. The atmosphere was heavy in the way these gatherings often are. People were eating, drinking, and talking. Some people cry a lot at times like that. Some people stay quiet. Some people cope by telling stories and laughing more loudly than usual. Some people begin saying things they would never say if the person were still alive. That is something I have noticed many times in life. Death seems to loosen people's tongues. Once someone is gone, everybody suddenly has something to say about them. That is what was happening in the house that day. People were sitting around eating, drinking, and talking about my uncle. At first, it was probably the kind of talk you expect after a funeral. Memories. Stories. Small jokes. Sad reflections. Maybe even a little comfort in being together. But as the talking went on, the feeling in the room started changing. I cannot tell you exactly why, not at first. It was just one of those things you feel before you can explain it. The air seemed different somehow. The noise in the room may have still been the same, but underneath it there was something uneasy, something tight. Then the pictures started coming off the wall. Not falling gently. Not slipping down because a hook had come loose. They were literally thrown off the walls. That is the only way I know how to describe it, because that is what it looked like. These were pictures my aunt had hanging for as long as I could remember. They had been in those places on the wall for years. We all knew those walls. We all knew those pictures. They were not loose. They were not halfway hanging. They were simply there, as they had always been. And then suddenly they were on the floor. I still remember the way everyone reacted. Nobody screamed. Nobody jumped up dramatically. Everybody just looked. There was this stunned silence, the kind that falls across a room when something happens that nobody expected and nobody can quickly explain. Everyone was in awe. That is the word that feels right. Shocked, yes, but more than that. It was as if for a second all the noise in the room had been swallowed by what we had just seen. People just stared at the pictures now lying on the floor as if their minds had not yet caught up with their eyes. Then we heard screaming. It was my twin cousin. He was yelling, "Let me out!" The sound came from downstairs. He had gone to the basement to get something for my aunt. Now he was down there screaming to be let out. That immediately turned all the attention away from the fallen pictures and toward the basement door. We rushed over there. The lock on that door was on the outside, which already made it the kind of door that feels more serious than an ordinary inside door. You do not expect to hear someone trapped behind a door whose lock is not even on the inside where they can control it. We saw that the latch had been pushed into place. We pushed it back the other way and opened the door, letting him out. He was shaken. Not joking. Not laughing. Really shaken. When we asked him what had happened, he said that when he came back upstairs and reached the door, he heard the lock move into place. Then when he tried to push the door open, he could not get out. He was stuck in the basement until we opened it for him. Now, if you are trying very hard to explain everything in an ordinary way, maybe you can say something slipped. Maybe the latch moved accidentally. Maybe something about the door shifted. But at that moment, right after pictures had just been thrown off the walls while everyone was talking about my uncle, it did not feel ordinary at all. They said I was letting someone into my life, into my home, who hated my guts. They said I was being warned. They told me I needed to clean house in my life, not literally with soap and water, but by being much more careful about who I spent time with and who I allowed close to me. In other words, they believed the dream was telling me that someone around me was dangerous for me in some spiritual or emotional sense. Not necessarily physically dangerous, but harmful. Full of bad feeling toward me. Someone who meant me no good. At the time, I took that seriously. Whether because I believed them immediately or because the dream had already frightened me so badly, I do not know. Probably both. But I listened. I started showing much better judgment about the people I socialized with. I became more cautious. I paid attention to the company I kept. I thought harder about people's motives, about the energy they brought into my life, about who felt safe and who did not. And after I did that, I never had that dream again. That, more than anything, made it hard for me to dismiss the warning. The dream stopped once I acted on what I had been told it meant. If it had continued after that, maybe I would have doubted it more. But it stopped completely. That felt significant to me, and it still does. Then there was my best friend. She was more than just a friend, really. We had known each other since first grade. She was like the sister I never had. Some friendships run deeper than blood because they are built over years of growing up together, knowing each other's pain, hopes, habits, and quiet ways of being. She was one of those people for me. There was a closeness there that time had built gently and strongly. Her father had passed away. Before he died, he had been in very bad shape physically. He was diabetic, blind, and could not walk. He was in a wheelchair. His body had failed him in many ways before death finally came. That is important to the story because it shaped the way she later described the dream. One day she called me and told me that she had dreamt about her father coming to see her. In the dream, he would walk across the street and come through her door. That alone was powerful, because in life before he passed, he could not walk at all. Yet here he was in her dream, walking. Not only walking, but coming on his own strength, moving toward her with purpose. Then he would say, "I came to see about you, Cookie." That was his message. Simple. Loving. Familiar. He said he had come to see about her. And just like with my cat dream, she had that dream 3 times. 3 times. When she called me and told me about it, I did not know what to make of it. I listened to her, and I remember trying to understand what it might mean. On one hand, it could sound comforting. A father coming back to check on his daughter. But on the other hand, because of the repetition and the timing and the fact that he had already passed on, it also carried a deeper, more unsettling feeling. I told her I did not know what it meant. Then I said maybe he was coming to take her to the other side. That is a hard thing to remember saying now. At the time, I do not think I fully grasped what I was saying or how soon it might matter. I was just trying to make sense of it out loud. But her answer is something I have never forgotten. She told me that if it was her time to go, then so be it. There was calm in the way she said it. Not fear. Not denial. Just acceptance. 3 months later, she passed away from an unexpected illness. That is still painful for me to say. unexpected illness. Those words always sound too clean compared to the reality of losing someone. She was there, part of my life, part of my history, part of my sense of the world. Then suddenly she was gone. And after she died, I could not stop thinking about what her father had said in the dream. "I came to see about you, Cookie." It no longer felt random or symbolic. It felt like preparation. Like a visit. Like a warning wrapped in love. I miss her dearly. Even now, sometimes I sit and think about her voice, about our long history together, and about that dream. I think about the way her father had been able to walk in the dream even though he had not been able to walk before death. I think about the way he crossed the street and came through her door as if no barrier mattered anymore. I think about the way he said he came to see about her, and I think about how only 3 months later she was gone. When you live through enough experiences like these, it becomes harder and harder to believe that every unusual thing is random. That is not to say I think every dream is a prophecy or every strange event is supernatural. I do not. Life has plenty of coincidence in it too. But there are moments that arrive with too much weight, too much pattern, too much timing, and too much emotional truth to be brushed aside easily. My uncle's repass, with the pictures thrown from the wall, and my cousin trapped in the basement. My cat dream repeating until I changed the company I kept. My best friend dreaming of her father coming to see about her just months before she passed. Taken separately, maybe people could explain them away. Together, they feel like part of a larger truth about how life and death, warning and love, memory and spirit sometimes seem to bleed into each other. What stays with me most about my uncle's story is not only the strange events, but the emotional meaning behind them. I did not feel in that house that day that some random force was acting up for no reason. I felt that my uncle was present and displeased. It felt personal. It felt like he was saying enough. Enough talking. Enough picking me apart. Enough making me the center of all this loose talk now that I cannot answer for myself. Whether that was truly him or not, I cannot prove. But the feeling in the room was strong enough that everyone responded to it, even if no one wanted to say so directly. What stays with me most about the cat dream is that it felt like something ugly trying to attach itself to me. A cat may sound like an odd symbol to some people, especially since many people associate cats with comfort or independence. But for me, because of my fear, it carried pure dread. The cat in that dream was not just frightening because it was a cat. It was frightening because it clung to me. Pressed itself against me, would not let go, and would not stop touching its face to mine. It felt like bad energy sticking itself to me. Once my mother, aunt, and grandmother told me to be careful who I let into my home and life. It all made emotional sense to me in a way I had not grasped alone. And what stays with me most about my best friend's dream is the tenderness of it. Even though it ended with great sadness, there was tenderness in the dream itself. Her father did not appear in some frightening form. He did not come in pain. He came walking. He came strong. He came lovingly. He came to see about his daughter. That phrase has such warmth in it. It sounds like concern. It sounds like care. It sounds like a parent checking on a child one last time before a great crossing. Sometimes I think that is the hardest thing about these experiences. They are not always simply scary. Sometimes they are loving too. Sometimes the supernatural, or whatever word a person wants to use, does not show itself only through terror. Sometimes it shows itself through warning, through protection, through visitation, through concern, through unfinished words, through an emotional truth that arrives before the physical truth catches up. I think that is why these memories have stayed with me so strongly over the years. Because they all sit somewhere between fear and love. My uncle's possible anger at being talked about after death felt real, but underneath that anger was still the fact that he was one of ours. That he had been loved and complicated and funny and kind-hearted. The cat dream terrified me, but the warning that followed may have protected me from someone who hated me. My best friend's father visiting her before she passed was heartbreaking, but it also felt like love reaching across a boundary to say, I am here. I see you. I came to see about you. And maybe that is what makes these moments so unforgettable. Not just that they are strange, but that they seem to reveal something about connection. About how people remain tied to each other even when death, distance, or ordinary logic says they should not be. There are times when I wonder whether my uncle really did throw those pictures from the wall. I can still picture the room, the people, the shock on their faces, the silence that followed. I can still hear my cousin yelling from the basement. I can still imagine my uncle, in whatever way a spirit exists if spirits do exist, listening to his siblings go on, then finally doing something dramatic enough to shut everybody up. That would have been like him in a way. He had personality. He had force. He was not a quiet man in life. If he wanted to make his displeasure known in death, throwing pictures from the wall almost sounds more like him than some subtle sign. There are also times when I think about my friend and feel a sorrow that never fully goes away. Grief changes shape over time, but it never completely disappears when someone mattered deeply to you. Her father's dream warning still troubles me because it makes her passing feel somehow known before it happened. Not prevented, not changed, just gently foreshadowed. As if he had come because he already knew and wanted her to know, in whatever small way a spirit can communicate, that she would not go alone when her time came. Sometimes I sit with all of these stories and wonder how many warnings, visitations, or signs people receive and never fully understand until later. Maybe that is part of being human. Maybe we are always only partly understanding the strange things that happen around us. Maybe some dreams are only dreams, and maybe some are not. Maybe some strange happenings in a house are only accidents, and maybe some are not. Maybe the dead do sometimes remain near enough to stir the air, move a latch, visit in a dream, or speak through the only door left open between worlds. I do not claim to know for sure. What I do know is what I saw, what I dreamt, what I was told, and what happened afterward. And those things have stayed with me. If someone asked me now whether I believe my uncle locked that basement door and knocked those pictures from the wall, I would say yes, I think he may have. Or at least I think something connected to him did. If someone asked me whether I believe the dream about the cat was a warning about someone hateful being too close to me, I would say yes, I believe that too, because the dream never came back once I became more careful. And if someone asked me whether I believe my best friend's father came to see about her before she passed, I would say yes, I think he did. Not because I have proof, but because some truths do not come wrapped in proof. They come wrapped in feeling, pattern, timing, and memory. And when you carry them long enough, you begin to know the difference between a thing that was merely strange and a thing that meant something. These things meant something. They still do. I still think of my uncle sometimes and smile before I get sad. I think of how funny he was. I think of the trouble he caused. I think of the kindness he showed us children. I think of the fact that my mother kept her home open to him when others would not. And then I think of that room full of family after his death, of the pictures flying from the walls, of the basement latch sliding into place, and of the silence that came over everyone once we all realized maybe he was still listening. I still think of that cat dream too, though I am grateful it never returned. There was something about that cat glued to my back and rubbing its face against mine that felt more than frightening. It felt like a message about closeness I did not want. About something unwanted attaching itself to me. I am still thankful I listened to the older women in my family when they told me to be careful. Sometimes older women know things they cannot explain in neat modern words, but they know them anyway. And I still think of my friend, my almost sister, and how her father walked in her dream when he had not been able to walk in life. I think of him crossing the street, coming through her door, and saying he came to see about her. I think of her calm acceptance. I think of her passing 3 months later. And I think of how love seems to move differently than we expect, even after the body is gone. I suppose that is what all of these stories come down to for me in the end. That the world is not as closed as we like to believe. That people may continue in ways we do not fully understand. That warnings can come through dreams. That emotions can shake a room long after a funeral meal has begun. That the dead may still object when they are being spoken about with too loose a tongue. That fathers may still come to see about their daughters. And that sometimes, when something happens that cannot be easily explained, the wisest thing is not to laugh it off too quickly. I have lived long enough with these memories to know that not everything can be proved. But not everything needs proof to be true to the one who lived it. These things happened. They shaped me. They taught me to listen more carefully to dreams, to atmospheres, to warnings, and to the strange ways love and anger can still move after death. And when I think about my uncle, about my dream, and about my friend, I do not think of them only as ghost stories. I think of them as reminders. Reminders that people leave traces. Reminders that not every goodbye is simple. Reminders that sometimes the unseen world presses close enough for us to feel it, hear it, dream it, or carry it with us long after the moment itself is over. That is what I believe now. And that is why I still remember every part of it. When I was 13, my dad divorced my mother after cheating on her. That was already hard enough for me to live through. At that age, you do not really have the emotional tools to process something like that in a calm and healthy way. You just feel the damage of it. You feel the split in the family. You feel the anger, the confusion, the shame, and the sadness, even if you cannot fully explain those feelings at the time. My dad moved in with the woman he had been seeing, and the two of them stayed together for 6 years. I lived with my mom after the divorce and visited my dad on weekends, so I was always moving between two worlds that no longer fit together. I am 20 now, and even though time has passed, I still remember that period clearly. It shaped how I felt in his home and how I felt around the life he had built after leaving us. Last year, my dad and his girlfriend bought a huge house in Elk Grove, California. It sat on half an acre of land, and behind the stone wall in the backyard there were miles of open land that had not been built on yet, though eventually it was supposed to become a new housing area. At the time, though, it still felt wild and empty back there, the kind of open land that makes a place feel even more isolated once night falls. The house itself was beautiful. It was large, expensive, and very new. It had only had one owner before them, and those people had sold it because of a divorce. They had not even lived there for a full year before leaving. That detail did not seem important at first, but later, once strange things started happening, it became one of those facts that lingered in your mind. From the beginning, ever since they moved into that house, I felt uneasy there. At first, I kept that feeling to myself because it seemed silly. I did not walk in and think the place was haunted. I did not feel some huge dramatic terror the second I crossed the doorway. It was more like a steady, uncomfortable awareness. I felt watched. That is the closest way I can describe it. I would be in the house, doing something normal, and feel as though I was not alone in the way I should have been alone. It was not enough to make me panic. It was not even enough to make me tell anybody. It just sat there in the background of every visit, like a low hum you only notice when everything else gets quiet. And the thing is, I never thought much of it at first because the house was only 2 years old. That mattered to me because, like a lot of people, I associated hauntings with old houses. If someone had told me a 100-year-old farmhouse or a dark Victorian home had strange activity, maybe I would have believed it more easily. But this was a newer house. Big, clean, expensive, and modern. In my mind, a house like that was not supposed to have that kind of feeling. So instead of trusting my instincts, I kept brushing them aside. One of the first odd things I noticed would happen while I was sitting in the living room watching television. The family room was positioned just past the TV, so while watching the screen I could still see into that other space out of the corner of my eye. More than once, I would be sitting there and notice the light in the family room dim for just a second, almost like something had moved through it. Not enough to plunge the room into darkness, just enough to make it feel like a shadow had crossed between me and the light source. At first, I told myself it had to be something electrical. Maybe the outlet was weak for a second. Maybe the power in the house shifted a little. Maybe I was tired. I am naturally skeptical, or at least I try to be, so I kept giving those moments normal explanations. But looking back, I feel like those little things were the beginning. Then one evening something happened that I could no longer so easily brush off. I was sitting on the couch again with the whole family, watching TV. It was not one of those moments where I was alone and nervous and too ready to imagine something. There were people around me. The room felt normal. Then I could have sworn I saw someone walk by in the family room. It was just a movement at first, like a person-shaped shadow passing through. I immediately thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. That is what I always told myself in moments like that. I barely had time to settle into that explanation when my dad's girlfriend suddenly said, "Did you see that?" That got my full attention. Then my dad answered, "What? The shadow that just walked by?" "Yeah, I saw it, but I didn't want to say anything because I thought it was just me." The second he said that, I felt the blood leave my face. That was the moment things changed for me. Up until then, everything I had experienced could still be pushed into the category of maybe. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe my eyes were tired. Maybe the light shifted. But when both of them saw the same thing at the same time and said it out loud before I could, I no longer had the comfort of telling myself it was only me. That shadow had been noticeable enough for all three of us to see. And that kind of confirmation is frightening in a way that is hard to explain. It is one thing to be scared by your own senses. It is another thing entirely to realize other people are seeing it too. About a month later, I was over there visiting again. My dad and his girlfriend decided to run to Home Depot one evening. It was dark out already, around 7 o'clock. I stayed behind in the house by myself. I was upstairs in the computer room, sitting at the desk and checking my email. The way the room was set up mattered. When you sat at the computer, your back was toward a wall, and there was only about 2 feet of space between you and that wall. In other words, no one could have stood behind me without being practically pressed into that small space. And I knew no one else was home. I was focused on the computer when I felt it. A very clear tap on my shoulder. Not a brush. Not a shift in air. A distinct tap. The instant it happened, I froze so completely it felt like my whole body locked. I did not whip around. I did not scream. I did not even breathe properly for a second. I just sat there, pretending I had not felt it. That was the strangest part of my reaction. Deep down, I knew there was no human being behind me. I knew I was alone in that house. And because I knew that, I could not bring myself to turn around and face whatever it was. It felt safer somehow to sit there and act like I did not notice. Maybe that sounds ridiculous, but fear does that to you. It makes you do whatever feels like the smallest, safest thing possible in the moment. Eventually, I got up and left that room, but after that I stopped visiting as much. I still heard stories though. And I still saw some things myself as time passed. They had a border collie, and that dog started acting in ways that were impossible to ignore. Before all this, the dog had hated going outside. You could barely get her into the backyard unless she absolutely had to go. She preferred staying inside. But after the night I felt the tap on my shoulder, everything changed. Suddenly, anytime anyone opened the door, she would bolt outside. No hesitation. No hanging back. It was like she could not wait to get out of the house. And once outside, she did not want to come back in. You had to drag her inside. What made it even stranger was what happened when she was brought back in. She would pee all over herself. This was not a puppy. This was a 9-year-old dog who had not gone inside the house since she had been potty trained. She had lived too many years with good habits for that kind of behavior to make any normal sense. The fear in her had become so intense that she would lose control of herself. Animals sometimes notice things long before people are willing to admit them, and the dog's behavior only made the whole situation harder to dismiss. Then there was the black thing in the guest room. My dad's girlfriend works for the FAA, same as my dad, and at one point she had to leave for a month for training in Oklahoma. During that time, my dad was home without her, and I came over more than once despite not wanting to be there much. One night, when I went to sleep in the guest room, I noticed something near the top of the room, up in the corner. The best way I can describe it is as a black blob. It was not shaped like a person. It was not a shadow cast by furniture or streetlights. It was just there, suspended in the upper corner of the room, rotating or shifting in place. Dark. Thick-looking. Not solid in the normal sense, but definitely there. I stared at it because I could not understand what I was seeing. Then I showed it to my dad. And he saw it too. That detail still matters to me, because once again, it was not only me. He looked at it and acknowledged it. It was there every night, but never during the day. Daylight came, and the corner was normal. Night came, and that thing would be back. This went on for about 2 months. During that time, we were still seeing shadows and feeling watched and noticing things that you could maybe explain away if you really wanted to. But the black rotating thing in that room was harder to ignore. It seemed like a sign that whatever was in the house was gathering itself into something more visible. For a long time, though, none of the events gave you that absolute certainty people always say they want in ghost stories. They were frightening, yes, but there was always room for doubt. A shadow might just be a shadow. A dog might be reacting to stress. A strange dark shape in a room might be some trick of night and fear. That is how I kept trying to think about it. Then one night something happened to me that I never told anyone at the time. I woke up thirsty in the middle of the night. I got out of bed and turned on the stair lights, then started downstairs to get some water. The house was dark except for the light coming from above. The dog was following me closely, sticking to my heels the way frightened animals sometimes do when they attach themselves to the person they trust. She clearly hated being in that house by then, and she did not like being separated from me once we were moving around in the dark. As I reached the stairs and the darker part below, with only a gleam of light from upstairs stretching into the lower part of the house, I heard it. A whisper in my ear. Not somewhere across the room. Not a sound from downstairs. Right in my ear. It was a distinct whisper, close enough to make every hair on the back of my neck stand up all at once. I cannot even tell you exactly what it said, because the terror of hearing it overwhelmed everything else. The second it happened, the dog behind me bolted. She ran through the kitchen toward the sliding glass door and started barking in fear. But what made it worse was that she seemed to be barking at me. Or maybe at whatever had just come close enough to whisper in my ear. In that moment, it felt as if she saw me as the center of the threat, and that only intensified my fear. I turned and ran upstairs so fast that I tripped on the last step. I got into my room, shoved myself in, and finally collapsed into bed. I fell asleep with my hands over my ears because I was so terrified I might hear the whisper again. And even though that was one of the scariest things I had ever experienced, I told no one. Not my dad. Not his girlfriend. Not my mom. No one. For some reason, I felt like speaking it out loud would make it more real. More powerful. Sometimes it feels like if you say these things, you somehow open yourself wider to them. That was how I felt then. That belief changed after what happened to my dad. Until then, I had mostly kept my experiences to myself, and I had not talked openly about the whisper. But then my dad, who is not a man easily frightened by anything, had his own experience that finally pushed the whole thing out into the open. My dad had been in the military for about 20 years. He was not the kind of man who scared easily. In fact, I had never really heard of anything frightening him before except losing his family. That was the only wound I knew he carried openly. Other than that, he was the kind of man who faced things head-on. That is important to understand, because if he had been a nervous or suggestible person, I might have doubted his story more. But he was not. One night, while his girlfriend was still away in Oklahoma, he was alone in the house getting ready for bed. Their bathroom was huge and open to the bedroom, with no actual door between them, just a walkway separating the spaces. He was standing at the bathroom mirror brushing his teeth. From the mirror, he could see the bedroom behind him in reflection. He had already locked up the house for the night, and the dog was in her kennel. In other words, there should have been no unexpected movement anywhere in that house. While brushing his teeth, he saw it. A black shadow shaped like a person walked quickly across the room behind him. He saw it in the mirror reflection. The room was well lit, so this was not some vague darkness in the corner of a dark room. He saw a form move past clearly enough to turn around immediately, and walk into the bedroom to confront whoever or whatever it was. But there was nobody there. That would have been enough to scare most people. But it did not stop there. As he stood there, he began hearing slight bangs on the walls around the house. Not in one spot. Not one isolated noise. Bangs from upstairs, downstairs, all over, as if something were moving through the house or hitting different parts of it just enough to let him know it was there. My dad, being who he is, decided he was not going to back down from that. He walked downstairs in the dark, deliberately, almost out of defiance. He wanted to show whatever it was that he was not afraid. He stood in the family room in complete darkness. Then he started cursing out loud. He challenged it. He told it to show itself. He said, F*** you. Show me what you've got. That was his way. Head on. Angry. Refusing to be intimidated. And then something answered him. Right in his ear, he heard a low, deep growl. Not somewhere across the room. Not from the dog, who was in her kennel. In his ear. He told me later that he froze with fear when it happened. Not because he was a coward, but because hearing something growl directly into your ear in complete darkness after challenging it is the kind of thing that bypasses pride and goes straight into your nervous system. It is pure fear. Still, even then, he kept himself together as best he could. He walked into the kitchen in the dark, got himself some water, and went back upstairs as if nothing had happened, determined not to show whatever it was how badly it had shaken him. Not long after that, he called me. His voice was shaky. That alone frightened me before he even finished telling the story. I knew my father. I knew what he sounded like when he was angry, tired, joking, irritated, or calm. This was different. He sounded rattled. When he told me what had happened, chills ran straight up my spine. And that was when I finally told him about the whisper in my ear. Until that moment I had kept it to myself. But once he had his own unmistakable experience, there was no more point in pretending this was all imagination or coincidence. The next day, my dad tried to get a priest to come bless the house. But they could not get anyone there right away. It would take a couple of days. So instead of waiting helplessly, my dad took the Bible and began reading from it himself. He went room by room, reading different verses for about 20 minutes in each room. He started in the family room, the very room where he had stood in the dark and challenged whatever was there the night before. About 5 minutes into reading in that first room, we heard a loud metallic bang upstairs. It sounded like an old air conditioner kicking on, except that was not how our air conditioner sounded when it came on. And besides, this was a brand new $900,000 home. It was not supposed to make old, violent metallic sounds like that. Later we went upstairs to investigate, but nothing had fallen and nothing looked out of place. It was just another noise with no visible source. But something changed after that Bible reading. The dog, who had been terrified to be in the house, started coming inside like she had never been afraid of it at all. No more bolting out every chance she got. No more peeing all over herself in panic. No more needing to be dragged in. It was as if something in the atmosphere of the house had lifted. And from that point on, we never had anything happen again. The black blob in the guest room was gone. The shadows stopped. The fear stopped. The house felt normal. That sudden shift was one of the strongest pieces of evidence, at least to us, that whatever had been there was truly gone. There was one more strange piece to all of this that we only realized later. During all the months when the scary things were happening, we also had Christmas in that house. It was the first Christmas there, so they decorated the staircase beautifully and took pictures of it because they wanted to remember how nice everything looked. At the time, those photos were just family pictures of a decorated home. It was only after the frightening experiences were over, once we uploaded the pictures and looked through them more closely, that we noticed something strange. In each photo, there was an orb moving up the staircase. Not the same exact place in every picture. It seemed to move from one picture to the next as if it were actually traveling upward. That alone might not convince everyone, because a lot of people dismiss orbs as dust, camera flashes, or reflections. I understand that. But when we focused in and zoomed closer, there appeared to be a very distinct face inside it. That image stayed with us too, especially because by then we had already gone through everything else in that house. If it had been only the photos, maybe we would have thought nothing of it. But coming after the shadows, the tap, the whisper, the growl, the black blob, and the dog's behavior, it felt like one more piece in the same dark puzzle. Looking back on all of it now, I still do not know exactly what was in that house. I do not know whether it came with the house from the first owners, even though they had only lived there less than a year before divorcing and selling. I do not know whether it was connected to the land behind the house, the long empty stretch of open ground beyond the stone wall. I do not know whether something attached itself to the house through grief, anger, or something else entirely. I also do not know whether the thing was there before my dad and his girlfriend moved in, or whether something about them, or the upheaval in all of our family lives, somehow opened the door to it. Those are questions I cannot answer. What I do know is how it felt. I know the steady unease. I know the sense of being watched. I know what it was like to see light dim as if something moved through it. I know what it felt like when 3 people all saw the same shadow at once. I know the freezing terror of feeling a tap on my shoulder when no one was behind me. I know the dread of seeing a dark thing rotating in a corner night after night. I know the sound of that whisper in my ear and the way the dog reacted. I know the fear in my father's shaky voice after he heard the growl. And I know the relief that came after he read the Bible through the house and everything stopped. Some people say these things get stronger when you talk about them. Maybe that is true in some cases. Maybe fear feeds them. Maybe attention does. I do not know. But I do know that silence did not protect us forever. Things only really changed when my dad finally confronted it, then turned from confrontation to faith. Cursing at it in the dark did nothing except provoke a response. Reading scripture in every room, whether by spiritual power or by the confidence and intention behind it, seemed to break whatever hold it had. That is the part one come back to most often. The contrast. Darkness and challenge on one side. Light and prayer on the other. On one night, my father stood in the dark daring it to show him what it could do. On another day, he went room by room with the Bible and reclaimed the house aloud. And it was after that second act, not the first, that peace returned. I still think about how long I kept my own experience to myself. Maybe if I had spoken sooner, my dad would have taken things more seriously sooner. Or maybe it would not have changed anything. At the time, all I knew was that I was scared and that speaking it out loud felt dangerous. In a way, that is still how these experiences feel. Even now, telling it makes me uneasy because it takes me right back into that house, into those rooms, into that dark staircase where I heard the whisper and saw the dog run in terror. And yet, I also feel grateful. Grateful that whatever it was is gone. Grateful that it never escalated into anything physically worse. Grateful that my dad, for all his pride and stubbornness, eventually turned toward prayer instead of only anger. Grateful that the dog came back to herself. Grateful that the house became just a house again. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if my dad had not done that reading. Would it have grown stronger? Would it have attached itself to one of us more directly? Would the dog have gotten worse? Would the black blob have stayed? Would the whispering and shadow walking have turned into something more visible or violent? I do not know, and I am glad I do not have to know. The strangest part is that before all of this, I never would have expected something like that in a house so new and so beautiful. It taught me that appearances mean very little when it comes to this kind of thing. Evil or dark energy, if that is what it was, does not need an old crumbling mansion to exist. It can sit in a bright, expensive home with fresh walls and nice landscaping just as easily as anywhere else. That house in Elk Grove looked like safety. It looked like success. It looked like a clean new start. But inside it, for a while, something moved through the rooms that did not belong there. And for a while, all of us felt it. I joined the military when I was still very young enough that people around me felt strongly about it, and not in a good way. The first time I tried, I was only 16. My father hated the idea. He did not sit me down and calmly explain why he did not approve. He did not say maybe later. He marched me straight down to the recruiter's office and had them tear up the contract right in front of me. That should tell you something about the kind of conflict there was in my home when it came to the future I wanted for myself. It was not that I came from some terrible childhood full of nothing but misery. That was not the case. I knew my parents loved me. I knew they cared in the way they understood how to care. But love does not always mean agreement, and in my case there was a great deal of conflict between what they wanted for me and what I wanted for myself. A few months before my 18th birthday, I made up my mind that I was going to do it again, only this time I was going to keep it secret until I could not be stopped. I had already learned once what happened when I announced my plans too early. So I kept quiet. I stayed focused. I did not tell everyone what I was thinking. I knew by then that my parents did not agree with the life I wanted. My siblings were upset with me too. The church was against it. None of my friends really understood why I would want to go. Everybody seemed to have an opinion about what I should do with my life. But none of those opinions felt like mine. To me, the military looked like the closest thing to a fresh start I was ever going to get. I think that is what I was really after more than anything. A fresh start. I wanted out of the arguments, and the expectations, and the small feeling of living inside a life that had already been planned by other people. I wanted to prove that I could do something hard. I wanted to go somewhere different. I wanted a bigger world than the one I was standing in. So I went for it again, this time old enough that no one could drag me back to tear up anything. I set out thinking I was going to change the world. When you are that age, you carry a kind of fire inside you. You do not yet understand all the ways the world refuses to be changed so easily. You still believe effort and courage and stubbornness are enough to move mountains. In some ways, that kind of belief is foolish. In some ways, it is the only reason young people dare do difficult things in the first place. Boot camp was not easy for me. Actually, that is an understatement. I made it through boot camp, but not because I had the perfect attitude. If anything, my attitude was part of the problem. I had a mouth on me. I had a hard time staying quiet when I should have stayed quiet. I did not enjoy being told what to do in the sharp, relentless way military training demands. I pushed back when I should have swallowed things. I had opinions, and I was not always good at hiding them. But somehow I made it through. Not gracefully, not quietly, but I made it. By the time I got to AT school, things felt easier. I had already survived the hardest shock to my system. I had learned enough not to fight every little thing. I understood the rhythm better. And then came my first real assignment, which at the time felt like winning some kind of strange prize. I got stationed on Coronado Island in California. That place felt almost unreal to me when I first got there. I was surrounded by the ocean. Everywhere I looked there was movement, air, salt, and life. The SEALs candidates were out there marching day and night, chanting as they moved, their voices rising and falling in a rhythm that became part of the sound of the place. The mess hall was right across the street. The club was only 2 blocks down. To someone young and newly out in the world, it felt like everything was finally opening up. I was away from home, away from the old battles, and standing in a place that felt alive all the time. What else could I have asked for back then? Of course, military life is never just what it looks like from the outside. It comes with rules, personalities, boredom, stress, and the strange comedy of living in close quarters with a lot of other people who are all trying to survive the same system in their own ways. In 4 months, I went through about 6 roommates in the barracks. That should tell you a little about how things work there. People moved in. People moved out. Some got reassigned. Some could not stand each other. Some simply disappeared into other routines and room changes. I was one of the lucky ones, because my room only ever had 2 or 3 other people in it at a time. Some rooms felt packed. Mine at least stayed somewhat manageable. At the same time, I worked in the barracks, and that gave me a little room to be creative. Maybe creative is the polite word. The truth is, I started changing the room numbers in the system so it looked like my room was only set up for 2 people instead of more. That way we had a little extra space, a little more breathing room, and a lot more opportunity. I also conveniently skipped my room during inspection walks, which eventually turned it into what we all knew as the contraband room. Every military barracks has its own version of this kind of thing. People find loopholes. People create hiding places. People build little systems to survive inspections and rules and the endless oversight of military life. In our case, anything that was not allowed during an inspection came to my room. I had ceiling-to-floor lockers that sat empty most of the time, and those became our secret storage spaces. I kept what I called a black list. When inspection time came around, people from all over the barracks would start getting nervous. Anything illegal, questionable, or just not supposed to be visible got collected up and moved. Bottles, gear, random things people should not have had, things too valuable to throw away and too risky to leave out, all of it would come through my room. My roommate kept notes. I handled the space. We would load those empty lockers and lock them up. Then after the inspection everything got handed back out again. It was a whole operation, and it worked. The night before the commanding officer's inspection was always the worst. That night in particular was especially busy. People from all 4 floors were standing in line outside our room, waiting for locker space like we were some kind of underground storage business. Everyone was rushing. Everyone was nervous. Everyone wanted their things hidden before the inspection team came through. My roommate and I were deep into it by then. She had her notes. I had my system. We were moving people in and out, collecting things, assigning locker spots, and making sure everything was locked down. By the time the line finally ended, we were exhausted. After everyone left, we stood there looking at the lockers, now full of other people's secrets, and joked about what we should keep as collateral for all the goods. It was probably a tired joke more than anything. We were beyond worn out by that point. The room was finally quiet. The lockers were padlocked. The chaos was done. And with that kind of tiredness only people under constant pressure know, we both dropped into bed and fell into a deep, heavy sleep almost instantly. That is why what happened later felt so shocking. Sometime around 2 in the morning, I woke up because my bed was shaking. At first, I was not fully awake. I was in that foggy place between sleep and awareness where your mind is still trying to catch up to your body. The lights in the room were off, but I could see the hall light coming through the crack at the bottom of the door. That little strip of light was enough to orient Maine. I remember thinking, in my sleepy irritation, that my roommate must be messing with me somehow. So I told her, still half asleep, to stop shaking my bed. Then the mirror on the back of the door started shaking. That woke me up fast. The mirror made a different kind of sound, a rattling tremble that did not feel like something imagined. Then the first locker began to rattle too, as if someone was trying to pull it open, except it was padlocked shut. Then the second locker started. Then mine. Then my roommate's locker. The sound was moving around the room in a sequence, not all at once like some general vibration. It was almost like something invisible was going from one object to the next, shaking each one in turn. Then it reached my roommate's bed. And when it got there, it sounded like someone was lifting the foot of her bed and letting it drop. She shot straight up in bed and instantly yelled at me to stop messing with her. That would have made sense too, because I was a huge prankster back then. If anything weird happened around me, people assumed I had caused it. I had earned that reputation honestly. So in the first second of waking, her mind went where mine had gone first. She thought I was somehow messing with her bed. But I was not. We both knew that almost immediately. Without even saying much at first, we followed the sound with our eyes and ears as it moved around the room. We listened to it travel, object by object, bed to locker to mirror to locker again, circling like something was making a round. It was not a random vibration. It was not the whole room moving together. It was this strange traveling motion and sound, all around us, until it ended back at my bed where it had started. Then it stopped. Completely. Silence. My roommate and I looked at each other, and did not say a word. We did not need to. We both had the exact same thought, and it was written all over our faces. Then we did what two frightened young women in a military barracks would do when something truly weird happens in the middle of the night. We jumped out of bed and ran for the hallway. We yanked the door open and stood there in the doorway shouting down the hall to the other rooms, asking if anyone had felt an earthquake. We were yelling all the things you yell when you are new to California and still half convinced that anything shaking in the middle of the night has to be an earthquake. We were panicked. We were rattled. And honestly, earthquake was the only explanation that made any sense to us in that first moment. To our surprise, we woke up the whole floor. No one else had felt anything. No one. That made it worse, not better. If it had been an earthquake, surely the rest of the floor would have felt it too. But room after room, sleepy, irritated people were telling us no, they had not been shaken awake. No, they had not felt a quake. No, nothing had happened out in the hall or in their rooms. Eventually, with no other option, we went back to bed. I say that simply, but the truth is we did not go back to bed in peace. We went back to the room because there was nowhere else to go. The room felt different now. The familiar jokes about the contraband room were gone. The tiredness that had knocked us out earlier was gone. All that remained was a shaken kind of alertness, and a room full of locked-up belongings that now seemed to have attracted something I could not explain. Morning did not bring answers either. As soon as daylight came in, we looked around the room carefully for signs of damage. If the room had truly shaken as hard as it felt like it did, then surely something would have been broken or cracked or at least visibly disturbed. But there was almost nothing. Some things had shifted. A few items had fallen. But there was no obvious structural damage. No cracked mirror. No broken lockers. No disaster zone. Then we went for chow. At breakfast, we kept asking people if they had felt an earthquake. We were trying to sound half casual about it. But I know now we were really fishing for confirmation that we had not imagined the whole thing. We even asked some of the people who had stood night watch because if there had been an earthquake, they should have known about it. They told us there had been no earthquake during the night. None. That answer landed strangely inside me. It should have settled the question, but instead it only deepened the mystery. If it was not an earthquake, what had shaken the room? Why did it move object to object the way it did? Why only our room? And why that room on that night, of all nights, with both lockers stuffed full of things from all over the barracks? The only thing that suffered any real damage was a gallon of unpasteurized apple cider we had hidden away that was never going to make it to whatever perfect potency it had been aiming for. That detail sounds funny now, but at the time it was part of the evidence that things had moved. A few items had shifted. Some had fallen. But nothing was truly destroyed, except maybe our sleep and our sense of peace about the room. And that last part mattered more than anything. Because after that night, our room no longer felt like just the contraband room. It felt like something had noticed it. I have thought about that night many times over the years, and I still do not know exactly what happened. If I tell it to someone who wants everything explained by logic, they might say maybe there was some strange vibration in the building, maybe pipes or machinery or something structural that somehow affected our room differently. But even now, that does not match what we heard and saw. It did not feel like building vibration. It felt directed. It felt specific. It felt as though something moved through the room in an ordered way, touching things one by one. And if I tell it to someone who believes in spirits or energies, they often decide immediately that something in that room had been stirred up by all the contraband, the tension, the exhaustion, or the hidden things packed into those lockers. I cannot say for sure whether that is true either. But I understand why people lean that way, because the room had become a strange little center of secrets and stress. Everyone in the barracks knew it. Everyone passed through it before inspection. It was a space full of nervous energy, hidden objects, and the kind of rule-breaking excitement that always carries a charge of its own. Sometimes I wonder if that mattered. Not because I think there was some ghost offended by alcohol and forbidden items. It is more that I think certain rooms gather energy from the lives lived in them. A room can hold atmosphere. It can hold tension. It can hold habits and secrecy and fear and laughter all together until something about it begins to feel different. Maybe that is all haunting ever is in some places. Or maybe it is something more. What I know is that my roommate and I experienced something together. That matters to me. If it had only been me waking alone in the dark, maybe I would question myself more. Maybe I would wonder if I was dreaming. But she heard it too. She felt her bed too. She sat up and accused me of pranking her before realizing I had been just as confused and frightened as she was. We followed the sound together. We ran into the hallway together. We got the same answer from everyone else together. That shared experience is what keeps it so fixed in my memory. Life in the military teaches you to endure strange things. You get used to noise, inconvenience, discomfort, weird personalities, and broken routines. You learn to laugh off a lot. You learn to keep going even when you are tired, irritated, homesick, or confused. But that night stayed with me because it did not fit any category I knew how to handle. It was not discipline. It was not pranking. It was not earthquake. It was something else. The irony is that before and after that night, I still loved that assignment. Coronado still felt incredible to me. The ocean was still there. The seals still marched and chanted. The mess hall was still across the street, the club still 2 blocks down. The energy of that place was still electric and full of possibility. But after that night, I also understood in a new way that no matter how full of sunlight and motion and youth a place may feel during the day, night can change it. A room can become different when the lights go out. A place you have laughed in can suddenly become a place you do not fully trust. My barracks room had been a center of fun and rebellion for a while. It became something else at 2 in the morning. And maybe that is why the story stayed with me more than other strange little moments in military life. The military is full of stories. Some are funny. Some are painful. Some are embarrassing. Some are proud. But only a few settle into that category of stories you still cannot explain years later. This is one of those for me. I can still picture the room. The dark. The strip of hallway light under the door. The mirror on the back of the door starting to shake. The first locker rattling as if someone were tugging it. Then the second. Then mine. Then hers. Then the sound at the foot of her bed, like someone lifting and dropping it. Then the silence. Then our eyes meeting. Then the run to the hallway. All of it is still there in me like a scene paused in time. If you asked me now whether I think it was paranormal, I would probably say I cannot rule that out. I do not use that answer because I want the story to sound bigger than it is. I use it because the usual explanations never fit well enough. The room was not just shaking in general. Something seemed to move around it. No one else on the floor felt anything. No earthquake had been recorded. And the atmosphere of that room, full of hidden things and secret traffic from all 4 floors, already had a charge to it that made the whole event feel even stranger. At the same time, I tried to stay honest about uncertainty. There are things in life we experience fully and still do not understand. Not every mystery gets solved. Not every eerie moment becomes a clear ghost story or a neat practical lesson. Sometimes it just remains what it was, a room, a night, 2 exhausted young women, and something shaking its way around the walls and lockers while the rest of the building slept in peace. Maybe that is enough. In a way, the fact that nothing was truly destroyed makes it even stranger. If something violent wanted to damage things, it could have. But it did not. It made itself known. It disturbed objects. It rattled metal and beds and mirrors. It woke us from a deep, exhausted sleep. It terrified us. Then it stopped. That almost feels more like presence than attack. As though something passed through, or circled the room, or simply wanted us to know it was there. That thought used to bother me more than it does now. Now it mostly fascinates me. Not because I enjoy being frightened, but because the world has always seemed just a little bigger after experiences like that. The edges of what feels explainable get pushed outward. You become more careful about certainty. You stop laughing quite so hard at other people's stories. You understand that there are nights when a room can do something no one else in the building experiences, and the only people left holding that truth are the two who woke up in it. I also think sometimes about our deep sleep before it started. There is something almost cruelly perfect about that detail. We were not lying there half awake and nervous. We were deeply asleep, the sleep of the truly exhausted after hours of work and stress and movement. That means whatever happened had to break through a heavy kind of rest to wake us. It was not some small noise that one anxious mind interpreted as more than it was. It shook me awake. Then it shook the room. Then it shook my roommate awake too. That is part of why I trust the memory. And if there is one final detail that always makes me smile a little, even in the middle of the unease, it is that the only true casualty was that gallon of apple cider never getting the chance to become whatever illicit masterpiece someone had hoped it would become. That feels very military somehow. Even in the middle of the unexplainable, there is always some ridiculous little practical detail standing there as proof that life keeps its sense of humor. But the real damage, as I have said, was to our peace of mind. After that, every late-night sound in the room felt different. Every small rattle meant more. Every inspection night carried a little extra memory with it. The contraband room had become the room where something moved in the dark. And once a room becomes that in your mind, it never fully goes back. Even now, when I think of Coronado, I do not think only of the beautiful parts, though there were many. I also think of that barracks room. I think of the 2 locked lockers full of hidden goods from all 4 floors. I think of the mirror, the beds, the door, the sudden rattling motion making its way around the room like an invisible hand with a plan. I think of how young we were, how tired we were, how little prepared we were for something that did not fit into any training manual or ordinary explanation. And I think of that moment of shared silence after it stopped. Because sometimes the most powerful part of an experience is not the event itself but the second afterward, when 2 people look at each other and realize they have stepped into the same mystery at the same time. That is what happened that night. And that is why I have never forgotten it.